This is our introduction to pronouns. And our subheading will be Grammar Commandment number 13, proper users of pronouns shall be we. And yes, I know it sounds really weird, but that is correct to say that proper users of pronouns shall be we. Pronouns are one of those weird things that we take a long time to actually understand because we don't necessarily speak them correctly. It's an aspect of grammar that we may not necessarily need to speak them correctly, but we need to write them correctly. And that's a little bit of what we mean by grammar 3, of realizing that when we speak and when we write sometimes can be different. So let's talk about pronouns today. So, brief introduction, that pronouns really are traditionally defined as words that are standing in for nouns. But we know that nouns are just one option. We have other things that we actually could use instead of a noun. And so maybe we should call them pronominals because we don't always stand in for nouns. We can stand in for noun phrases, noun clauses, gerunds, all kinds of other weird things, all referring to what we call the antecedent, what the pronoun's referring to. So if I said the maple bacon donut at Byler's Donuts is delicious, well, I could take this phrase which says the maple bacon donut at Byler's Donuts and replace it with a single word, it. It is delicious. I said, what is it? Well, it is donut, but it's not just simply donut. It's the entire phrase. It's the maple bacon donut at Byler's Donuts. That whole thing is really what it is referring to. So to say that a pronoun only replaces a single noun, it's kind of limiting the pronoun. He's a little bigger than that. Pronouns are traditionally defined as words, once again, standing in as nouns, but they can also stand in for other nominals, such as noun phrases and clauses. So if I said the policeman warned Hannah to drive the speed limit, I could take this infinitive, which is to drive the speed limit, and say that he told Owen that too. Well, the word that is actually replacing that verb phrase, which is to drive the speed limit. It's actually a nominal infinitive, but it's still a verb phrase. So now we have pronouns replacing verbs. It's possible. If I say how you spend your time is none of my business, I can take this entire noun clause and replace it with a single pronoun and say, that is none of my business, or it is none of my business. So once again, we're just simply looking at how a pronoun can't be limited to just simply a single noun. It actually can be looked at as replacing maybe a phrase or even bigger, even to a clause. So let's talk about the personal pronouns. There are 3 different cases of personal pronouns. And so the determining what pronoun to use comes down to what position is it in the sentence and therefore what case we should use. So let's talk about the 3 different cases. The first case we have is what we call subjective or nominative case. I typically will call it nominative case, but sometimes you might call it subjective case, depending on what foreign language you also take. Calling it nominative is very Spanish. If you call it subjective, is very German. These are our pronouns: I, you, she, he, and it. Those are all singular. And then on the plural side, we have we, you, and they. This is broken down both the singular and plural, as well as first person, I and we, second person, you and you, and third person, she, he, it, and they. Those are all the third person pronouns. We also have what we call the accusative case or the objective case. I like calling them the objective case, but once again, if you take German, you might refer to it as the accusative case. And even in German, they actually break this into 2 different groupings. They have the accusative and also the dative case. In Spanish, we just refer to this as the objective case. These would be pronouns like me, you, her, him, it, us, you, and them. Well, the 2 columns separate both the singular and the plural, as well as we break it down into person, first person, second person, and eventually third person. The reason I like calling it the objective case is it has this word object, which is going to be kind of helpful for us. And then lastly, we have what we call the possessive case, which sometimes is referred to as the genitive case, once again, for the Germans. So this time, there are 2 columns, both singular and plural, but I also have pronouns in parentheses because they have little buddies with them, because they have both an adjective as well as a pronoun form. We have the adjectives, which are not in parentheses, listed here in white. My, your, her, his, its, our, your, and their. And then we have those that are actually nouns in parentheses. Mine, yours, hers, his, its, ours, yours, theirs. So these are our possessive pronouns. Let's go back and take some notes on each of these cases. So, under the nominative case pronoun, I want you to notice that we use these anytime we're referring to a subject. Anytime we use a subject, we should use one of these nominative case pronouns. We also use them for a pattern 3 or pattern 5 when we're following either a to be verb or a linking verb, and that noun is sitting there. We call him the predicate nominative, and that's one of the reasons why people like calling it the nominative case pronoun. So if it's a subject, those are usually not too confusing. We'd say Weston and I or Weston and me were entranced by the smell of donuts at the bakery. Well, we would naturally say Weston and I. It's a subject. And if I said, and we began to drool, or us began to drool, hopefully you would all naturally say the word we, because once again, it's a subject. So I want you to notice that any of these pronouns would always fit naturally as the subject of a sentence. What makes them challenging is that we don't necessarily use them correctly when they're the predicate nominative, when it comes after a to be verb or it comes after a linking verb. So if I said, if you are looking for the one who ate the last Hostess fruit pie, this is she or this is her. Yee. Well, this time you'd actually would say this is she, because the reason is it's a predicate nominative. If you were diagramming it, you would say this is slanted line she, follows that to be verb. And a predicate nominative will always take a nominative case pronoun. And so this is one of the very few pronouns that we actually don't speak correctly. And that's okay, but we definitely should write it correctly and say this is she. If another example, if I said, I've had a lot of English teachers over the years, and Mr. Marsh is not as smart as they are not as smart as them. This is tricky. But if you think about it, what you're really saying is you've created what we call an elliptical clause. An elliptical clause. What that means is the sentence actually continues. You can imagine a little ellipses there, and the sentence continues. You're saying Mr. Marsh is not as smart as they are smart, is really what you're saying. And if you, in a sense, finish the thought in your head, you realize, oh, I've got to choose the word they because it's actually the subject of an imaginary verb. Mr. Marsh is not as smart as they are, or as they are smart. So oftentimes, these elliptical clauses will ask us to use a subjective or a nominative case pronoun. Let's pause our video and then restart and take a look at the objective case.